Hey everyone, tonight we re-travelling back into the deep winter of the Middle Ages, into cottages so small that every breath mattered. Picture it, a single, smoky room, its walls thick with mud and straw, frost crawling along the inside of the shutters. Outside, the world lies silent, a frozen expanse of white fields, lifeless trees, and the slow creak of ice on the river. Inside, the air smells of peat smoke and damp wool. The only light comes from a hearth that glows more ember than flame. This was how most of Europe once lived, not in castles or towns, but in small villages, bound by the rhythm of cold and survival. When winter came, life shrank to the space around the fire. The family gathered close, parents, children, sometimes even the cow or goat that shared their warmth. The floor was cold earth, the bed was straw, and the night was long. Every sound, the sigh of wind through the thatch, the shifting of animals, felt like the breath of the dark itself. But in that darkness there was comfort too. Stories whispered beside the fire, prayers murmured under blankets, the soft rustle of straw as bodies turned and huddled closer. These nights taught the rhythm of endurance, of getting through one more frost, one more dawn. To sleep in winter for the medieval peasant was not a luxury. It was an act of faith. So before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you enjoy this quiet drift into forgotten corners of the past. And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. The winter landscape, the cold world outside. The darkness of the medieval night was a profound, often terrifying realm, broken only by the flickering glow of a dwindling hearth fire and the hushed whispers of anxious sleep. But in winter, this darkness was amplified by a palpable, pervasive cold that seeped into every fibre of existence. The world outside the peasant's hut transformed into a vast, hostile expanse. Frost crept across fields, turning every blade of grass into a brittle, crystalline dagger. Rivers froze solid, their once flowing waters now silent, unyielding pathways of ice. And the scattered cottages, their mud-daubed walls and thatched roofs offering meagre defence, huddled like fragile islands of warmth in endless, undulating seas of white silence. Imagine the air, sharp and brutal, stealing your breath with every inhale, stinging any exposed skin with its icy bite. The sky above was often a vast, unbroken expanse of bruised grey, heavy with the promise of more snow, or, on rarer days, a startling, crystalline blue that seemed to amplify the sheer scale of the cold. The sun, if it showed at all, was a weak, indifferent eye, offering little warmth, only a stark illumination of the frozen landscape. The ground beneath your crude, straw-stuffed boots was a perpetually shifting canvas of snow and ice. Deep drifts, sculpted by the ceaseless wind, rose unexpectedly, some higher than a man, making every step an exertion, every journey a physical battle. Frozen rivers, their once flowing waters locked solid under immense sheets of ice, lay like glassy scars across the land, treacherous to cross, yet sometimes the only passable routes. The skeletal trees, gnarled and stunted, their branches rimed with frost, stood like silent, enduring sentinels against the overwhelming whiteness. Listen to the profound, almost oppressive silence of this frozen world. The thick blanket of snow muffled every sound, absorbing the whisper of the wind, the distant creak of trees, the subtle shift of immense ice sheets. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. It was a dead silence, broken only by the muffled crunch of your own footsteps, a solitary declaration against the vast quiet or the distant, mournful howl of a wolf, its hunger sharpened by the unforgiving season. Other signs of life were rare, struggling against the pervasive cold. A few scrawny deer, their coats thick, but their movements slow, might be glimpsed at the edge of the forest, desperate for forage. A lone crow, its call harsh and solitary, would occasionally break the stillness, a dark silhouette against the pale sky. The world felt larger, emptier, stripped bare by the cold's merciless grip. Your own cottage, seen from afar, was a small, fragile point of warmth and smoke against this immense, hostile backdrop. Its low, mud-daubed walls seemed to shrink under the weight of the snow-laden roof, its single, shuttered window a dark, unblinking eye against the pervasive gloom. It was a haven, yes, but a precarious one, constantly under siege from the elements. The cold, a relentless, insidious enemy, would seep into every crack, every crevice of your home, threatening to steal the very life from within. The fear of frostbite, of hypothermia, of the insidious numbness that could lead to death. These were constant, gnawing anxieties that permeated every waking hour and haunted every restless sleep. Frost crept across fields, rivers froze, and cottages huddled like islands of warmth in seas of white silence. The cold world outside was a profound and terrifying reality that shaped the daily lives of medieval peasants in winter. It was a world of unyielding challenge, where survival was a daily miracle, a testament to the quiet endurance of fragile lives under vast frozen skies, always engaged in an endless struggle against the pervasive, lethal cold, waiting for the elusive promise of spring. The peasant's home. In the medieval winter, when the world outside was a brutal landscape of frost and snow, the peasant's home was more than just a dwelling. It was the first, most crucial defense against freezing to death. This was a fragile sanctuary, built with ingenuity and necessity from the very earth it stood upon. Thick mud walls, a robust thatched roof, and smoke-stained beams. The cottage itself was the primary shield against the deathly cold, embodying the quiet endurance of fragile lives under vast frozen skies, a testament to the unyielding will to survive. Imagine the air inside thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the comforting aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence. The sounds were no longer the whisper of the wind through endless snow. They included the soft crackle of a dwindling fire, the gentle breathing of a family huddled close, and the rhythmic creak of timber in the cold. Snow drifting against shuttered doors, a visible barrier, offered a muted counterpoint to the pervasive chill within. The walls of the peasant's home were typically constructed from wattle and daub, a framework of interwoven branches, wattle plastered with a thick mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung, daub. These walls, often a foot or more thick, were excellent insulators designed to trap warmth within and repel the biting winds without. They were rough, uneven, and perpetually earthy, a direct extension of the land itself. Listen to the muffled sounds from outside, absorbed by the thick mud walls, creating a sense of profound stillness and relative security. Hear the subtle creak of the timber beams supporting the heavy roof, groaning softly in response to the cold or the expansion and contraction of the structure. See the rough, uneven surfaces of the interior walls plastered with mud, their texture a constant, tangible reminder of the raw materials of their construction. The roof, a massive conical or gabled structure, was typically made from thick layers of thatch, reeds, straw, or heather, painstakingly layered and tied onto a sturdy timber frame. This thatch, sometimes several feet thick, was an exceptionally effective insulator, creating a protective thermal blanket against the intense cold and heavy snowfall. It was a labor-intensive construction constantly needing repair, but absolutely essential. The beams that supported this roof, rough-hewn and smoke-stained over generations, stretched across the interior, often serving as hanging places for dried herbs, tools, or sparse belongings. Their dark, weathered surfaces bore the indelible mark of countless fires, countless winters, creating a ceiling that was both functional and aesthetically rich with the patina of time and human presence. The windows, if any, were small, unglazed openings, shuttered tight with wooden boards or covered with scraps of hide against the winter winds. The doorway, low and narrow, was fitted with a heavy wooden plank, barred securely from the inside, its thickness a crucial barrier against the cold and any unwanted intruders. The cottage itself was the first defence against deathly cold. It was a single-room dwelling, typically housing the entire family, and often their most precious animals, a cow, a few sheep, or goats, whose body heat contributed to the overall warmth. The central hearth, a cleared patch of earth or stone, was its heart, its smoke drifting upwards through a hole in the roof, creating a perpetually smoky but significantly warmer interior. Thick mud walls, thatched roof, smoke-stained beams. The peasant's home was a profound act of defiance against the brutal elements of the medieval winter. It was a constant, living struggle, shaping every daily ritual and every moment of rest. This was the enduring secret of their survival, a testament to how people constructed their very existence against freezing dead in the cold nights of relentless struggle, forever tethered to the fragile warmth of their humble yet indispensable sanctuary. The central hearth. In the relentless grip of a medieval winter, when the cold permeated every fibre of existence and the world outside was a landscape of lethal ice and snow, the hearth was more than just a place for fire. It was the sacred beating heart of the peasant's home. A fire smouldered all night, fed with scraps of wood, peat, or dried dung. Its glow was the absolute centre of survival. Warmth, cooking, a psychological beacon against the terrifying darkness, a constant guardian against the deathly chill that threatened to claim lives. Imagine the air, thick with the pungent aroma of wood smoke, mingled with the earthy scent of mud brick, damp straw, and the subtle tang of human presence. The sounds were no longer the whisper of the wind through endless snow. They included the rhythmic crackle and pop of burning fuel, the contented hiss of melting snow near the flames, and the hushed murmurs of a family huddled close. Firelight flickering against rough timber beams, casting dancing shadows, illuminated a world utterly dependent on its fragile glow. The hearth itself was typically a simple, cleared patch of earth or stone in the centre of the cottage, often slightly raised. It had no chimney in the modern sense. Smoke would drift upwards, curling around the soot-stained beams, eventually finding its way out through a smoke hole in the roof or through gaps in the thatch. This made the air perpetually smoky, often stinging the eyes and lungs, but it also distributed heat more evenly throughout the single room. Listen to the rhythmic crackle and pop of the burning fuel, a constant, comforting symphony against the profound silence of the frozen night. Hear the contented sizzle of thin pottage, simmering in a heavy iron cauldron suspended over the flames, its rich, earthy aroma filling the cottage, promising strength and sustenance. See the dancing flames, their orange and red hues pushing back the encroaching darkness, illuminating the rough walls, transforming simple mud brick into a canvas of shifting shadows. Warmth was the hearth's most immediate and vital gift. In temperatures that could instantly kill, the radiating heat of the fire was the difference between life and death. Bodies, stiff and shivering from the cold, would visibly relax as they absorbed its gentle caress, allowing exhausted muscles a chance to thaw, to recover. It was a profound, visceral comfort, a slow thawing of the night's deep chill. But the hearth also cooked food, making tough grain digestible, warming thin broth, turning hard bread palatable. It was the communal gathering place for the evening meal, for drying damp clothes, for mending tools, for preparing for the next day's relentless toil. It was the social and spiritual center of their existence, a place of safety, connection, and shared ritual. Crucially, the fire smoldered all night, fed with scraps of wood, peat, or dried dung. Fuel was precious and constantly scarce in winter. Peat, dug from bogs or dried animal dung from their own animals often housed in the same cottage, provided a slower, longer-lasting burn than wood, ensuring a continuous, if fragile, heat source. The embers would be carefully banked before sleep, covered with ash to preserve their glow, ensuring that the spark of life would endure until dawn. Its glow was the heart of survival. The central hearth was a pervasive, fundamental reality for medieval peasants in winter, transforming their raw ingenuity into the very means of defying a lethal environment. It was a slow drift through smoky cottages, frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with profound discipline, charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead, and enduring countless cold nights under vast, frozen skies, forever tethered to the enduring, life-giving flame, shared heat. In the brutal grip of a medieval winter, when the cold permeated every fibre of existence and the thin walls of a peasant-esque cottage offered meagre defence, individual warmth was a precious, fleeting commodity. For the peasant family, the most profound and effective defence against freezing to death was not merely the struggling hearth or layers of rough clothing, but each other. Shared heat was a fundamental primal strategy. Families, sometimes animals too, slept close together, pressed into one bed to share breath and warmth, creating a living, breathing furnace against the deadly chill. Imagine the air inside, thick with the pungent aroma of wood smoke, animal hides, and the subtle tang of human presence, now infused with a palpable, almost suffocating closeness. The sounds were no longer just the crackle of fire or the rustle of straw. They included the soft, rhythmic breathing of many bodies, the occasional sigh, the gentle rustle of worn blankets as someone shifted, and the low, comforting hum of collective life. Breath misting in the darkness, a visible affirmation of warmth, mingled with the shared exhalations of the huddle. As the fire dwindled to its lowest glow, casting long, dancing shadows, the entire family would arrange themselves for sleep. Their bed was often a large, communal pallet on the packed earth floor, thickly layered with straw or dried bracken. Into this single, designated space, parents, children, and sometimes even elderly relatives would pack together, limbs intertwined, bodies pressed close, creating a single, dense mass of warmth. Listen to the gentle, rhythmic breathing of your family members, their soft snores, the quiet whimpers of a child nestled close to its mother's breast. Hear the subtle movements of the worn blankets, the rustle of straw, as bodies instinctively sought a closer, warmer position. See the indistinct forms of the huddle in the dim light, a protective mound of human life against the immense, cold emptiness of the cottage. The benefits of this communal sleeping were immense, crucial for survival. Each human body, burning its own internal furnace, contributed its heat to the collective. The air trapped between the intertwined forms, warmed and contained by their combined heat, and the thick, rough blankets, became a personal microclimate, a remarkably effective defense against the biting cold that seeped from the mud walls. Without this shared heat, especially on the coldest nights, enduring the long hours would be an almost impossible feat, particularly for the most vulnerable, infants, the sick, and the elderly. The cold, however, was a persistent adversary. It found its way in through any gap in the blankets, seeped up from the damp ground, and settled in the open spaces of the cottage. Even pressed close, you would still feel its biting chill, on an exposed ear, or the cold air seeping in as someone shifted away. The need for warmth was constant, an underlying current beneath the surface of even the deepest exhaustion. Crucially, in many peasant homes, the animals too were brought indoors, often into a byre that was an extension of the living space or a partitioned corner of the single room. A cow, a few sheep, or goats, their presence added significantly to the collective warmth. Their large bodies, radiating heat, contributed to the human furnace, their musky scent and soft breathing a constant backdrop to the shared sleep. Families, sometimes animals too, slept close together, pressed into one bed to share breath and warmth. Shared heat was a pervasive, fundamental strategy for medieval peasants in winter, transforming their raw social bonds into the very means of defying a lethal environment. It was a slow drift through smoky cottages, frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with profound symbiosis, charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead, and enduring countless cold nights under vast frozen skies, forever tethered to the life-giving warmth of each other and their collective protection. The bed of straw. In the brutal grip of a medieval winter, when the cold permeated every fibre of existence and the very earth itself radiated chill, the peasant's bed was far more than a place of rest. It was a fundamental tool of survival. The bed of straw, a carefully constructed pallet stuffed with dried hay or chaff, formed the critical insulating barrier against the lethal cold. Straw-filled mattresses, topped with rough linen or wool, became the last crucial line of defense against the frozen earth below, embodying the quiet endurance of fragile lives under vast frozen skies. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the comforting aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now permeated by the dry, sweet smell of fresh straw. The sounds were no longer just the crackle of fire. They included the soft, rhythmic rustle of the straw beneath worn blankets, the gentle breathing of a family huddled close, and the profound, comforting hum of collective life. The chill of night, pressing in through gaps in the thatch, was met by the resilient, natural insulation of the peasant's chosen bed. Your bed was typically a large communal pallet on the packed earth floor, sometimes a shallow depression or a simple wooden frame. But its essence was the thick, generous layer of straw, hay, or dried bracken that filled it. This plant material, gathered painstakingly after the harvest, was the primary insulating layer, chosen for its abundance, its lightness, and its remarkable ability to trap air, creating a thermal buffer against the cold, damp earth. Listen to the soft, rhythmic rustle of the straw beneath worn blankets as bodies shifted, settling into its contours. Hear the low murmur of conversation as a family arranged themselves, seeking the deepest, warmest pockets. See the thick layers of straw, perhaps a foot or more deep, forming a resilient mound on the floor, providing a vital separation from the lethal chill of the ground. Above the straw, crude coverings of rough linen or worn woolen blankets were placed. These were often patched, threadbare, and smelled faintly of sheep and countless nights, but their coarse fabric provided additional insulation. More importantly, they held the straw in place, preventing it from scattering too widely, ensuring its insulating power remained concentrated. The cold, however, was a persistent adversary. It found its way in through any gap in the coverings, seeped from the damp ground and settled in the open spaces of the cottage. But the straw, with its thousands of tiny air pockets, created a surprisingly effective barrier. It prevented the direct transfer of lethal cold from the earth to the human body, transforming an otherwise deadly sleeping surface into something remotely habitable. However, the bed of straw came with its own set of challenges. It was a haven for fleas and lice, whose relentless bites would interrupt precious sleep, adding another layer of irritation to the struggle for rest. The straw itself would eventually grow damp from condensation, from shared breaths, from any minor leaks in the thatch, requiring regular replenishment. A laborious task in the depths of winter. Straw-filled mattresses, topped with rough linen or wool, insulated against the frozen earth below. The bed of straw was a pervasive, fundamental tool of survival for medieval peasants in winter, transforming their raw ingenuity into the very means of defying a lethal environment. It was a slow drift through smoky cottages, frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with profound resourcefulness, charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead, and enduring countless cold nights under vast frozen skies, forever tethered to the humble, life-saving warmth of their earthy bed. The rituals of night, the evening meal. As the brutal medieval winter sun finally dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into profound darkness and chilling cold, the day's relentless toil in the fields would cease. For the medieval peasant, this transition was marked by a fundamental ritual, the evening meal. Hot broth, coarse bread dipped into it, ale or thin beer. This was more than just sustenance. It was a deliberate act of internal warmth, a vital fuel for the body's furnace that began in the stomach before the long, arduous night watch, a silent testament to their enduring struggle. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the comforting aroma of cooking pottage, and the subtle tang of wood smoke. The sounds were no longer the shouts from the fields or the distant bleating of sheep. They included the rhythmic crackle and pop of the hearth fire, the contented sizzle of simmering stew, and the hushed murmurs of a family gathering close. Firelight flickering against rough timber beams cast dancing shadows, illuminating a world utterly dependent on its fragile glow. The fire in the central hearth, carefully managed and kept low to conserve precious fuel, was the heart of the home. Over its flames in a heavy iron cauldron simmered the pottage, a thick, sustaining, if monotonous, stew. It was a testament to limited resources: dried peas, a few withered roots like turnip or parsnip, perhaps a handful of foraged greens, and if truly fortunate, a small, precious piece of cured pork fat, slowly rendered to add a whisper of richness. Listen to the contented sizzle of the pottage, its rich, earthy aroma filling the cottage, making hungry bellies ache with anticipation. Hear the sounds of chewing, deliberate and focused, as coarse bread was torn and consumed. See the dark, steaming liquid being ladled into individual wooden bowls, or perhaps simply scooped onto thick slices of stale bread that served as edible plates. The meal itself was consumed with a solemn intensity. There was little conversation during this grim ritual. Each bite was a determined act of survival, a conscious effort to absorb every precious calorie. The children, their faces pale and drawn with the weariness of chronic hunger, would eat slowly, deliberately, their eyes fixed on the food, knowing that seconds were a rare, precious gift, and that this was all they would have for many hours. The warmth of the pottage, even if thin, was a welcome internal embrace against the persistent cold of the cottage. It flowed down, a soothing fire in the stomach, radiating outwards, momentarily pushing back the insidious chill that constantly threatened to reclaim their bodies. It was a brief moment of bodily comfort, a fleeting respite before the deeper cold of the night truly set in. To accompany the meal there was ale or thin beer, not a refined brew, but a thick, cloudy, often nutritious liquid brewed from the same precious barley that went into the bread. It provided not only calories but also a safer source of hydration than untreated water. It was consumed with gratitude, adding a layer of internal warmth. After the meal, the bowls would be scraped clean with a piece of bread or a finger, ensuring not a single calorie was wasted. The fire, which had been bright for the cooking, would now be carefully banked, covered with ash to preserve the embers. Hot broth, bread dipped into it, ale or thin beer. Warmth began in the stomach before the night watch. The evening meal was a pervasive, fundamental ritual for medieval peasants in winter, transforming their raw ingenuity into the very means of defying a lethal environment. It was a slow drift through smoky cottages, frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with profound discipline, charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead, and enduring countless cold nights under vast, frozen skies, forever tethered to the life-giving nourishment of their shared bounty, a vital prelude to the rituals of rest. Banked fires, as the medieval winter sun finally vanished below the horizon, plunging the world into profound darkness and chilling cold, and the evening meal was consumed, a critical ritual took precedence, the banking of the fire. This was not a passive act, but a meticulous vital duty. Before sleep, embers were carefully covered with ash, to glow slowly a fragile heat, through long hours a silent, ceaseless vigil that ensured the spark of life would endure until dawn, guarding against the terrifying prospect of a fireless, lethal night. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the comforting aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence. The sounds were no longer the contented sizzle of cooking pottage. They included the soft crackle of a dwindling fire, the gentle rustle of straw beneath worn blankets, and the hushed murmurs of a family preparing for sleep. Firelight flickering against rough timber beams, casting dancing shadows, illuminated a world utterly dependent on its fragile glow. The fire in the central hearth, which had provided warmth and cooked the evening meal, was now deliberately diminished. Fuel, precious and constantly scarce in winter, had to be conserved with extreme care. The goal was not to maintain a roaring blaze, but to preserve the glowing heart of the fire, its embers, until the morning, ensuring that it could be easily rekindled without the arduous and cold task of striking a new spark. Listen to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the designated fire tender, often an elder or the head of the household, as they knelt by the hearth. Hear the gentle scrape of a crude stick or piece of wood, carefully raking the glowing embers into a compact pile. See the subtle movements of their hands, meticulously covering the hot coals with a thick layer of fine ash, insulating them, preserving their heat, allowing them to smoulder slowly, deeply through the long night. This covering of ash was crucial. It choked off the oxygen just enough to prevent the embers from flaring up and consuming the remaining fuel too quickly, but not so much that they died completely. The ash acted as a natural blanket, trapping the heat within the core of the embers, allowing them to radiate a fragile warmth for many hours. The warmth that emanated from this banked fire was minimal, a mere whisper of heat. It created a small, radiating halo in its immediate vicinity, a gentle caress on the faces of those nearest the hearth. But its psychological comfort was immense. It was a visible sign that the cold had not entirely won, that a precious spark of warmth and life persisted in the profound darkness. The silence that followed the banking of the fire was profound, heavy with the weight of the night. The cottage, now plunged into near absolute darkness, with only the faintest glow visible through the ash, grew steadily colder. But the knowledge that the embers were alive, waiting, provided a deep, if unspoken, reassurance. For the children, nestled close, the idea of the sleeping fire was a comfort. For the adults, the banked embers were a constant reminder of their vigilance, their responsibility to maintain this vital spark through the long, vulnerable hours. To wake and find the fire utterly dead was a profound failure, threatening the family with lethal cold and a desperate, difficult morning. Before sleep, embers were carefully covered with ash to glow slowly, a fragile heat through long hours. Banked fires were a pervasive, fundamental ritual for medieval peasants in winter, transforming their raw ingenuity into the very means of defying a lethal environment. It was a slow drift through smoky cottages, frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with profound discipline, charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead, and enduring countless cold nights under vast frozen skies, forever tethered to the enduring, life-giving heart of the hearth. Sleeping garments in the bone-chilling depths of a medieval winter, where the cold seeped into every fibre of existence and hearth, fires offered only a struggling warmth. Clothing was not a matter of fashion, but of absolute, life-saving necessity. Even in sleep, the battle against freezing to death was relentless. Sleeping garments were not delicate nightclothes, they were heavy, practical layers. Woolen shifts, cloaks and hoods served as blankets, transforming the very clothes they wore into a crucial armor against the night, a silent, ceaseless defense against the lethal chill that threatened to claim lives. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the pervasive aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now permeated by the musky smell of damp wool and old animal hides. The sounds were no longer the gentle breathing of a family settling to sleep. They included the soft rustle of coarse wool, the gentle shift of bodies, and the profound, comforting hum of collective life. Firelight flickering against rough timber beams illuminated a world utterly dependent on its fragile glow and the protection offered by its rough, insulating fabrics. Your day clothes and your night clothes were often one and the same, or at best, only slightly differentiated. The practicalities of poverty and the relentless cold meant that layers were accumulated throughout the day and often kept on through the night. The most basic garment was a long, rough woolen shift or tunic, its fabric coarse against the skin, designed to trap precious body heat. Listen to the soft rustle of coarse wool as bodies shifted on the straw bed, each movement producing a dry, whispering sound. Hear the low murmur of sleep-heavy voices, the occasional cough, muffled by layers of fabric. See the indistinct forms of your family huddled together, their figures swaddled in thick, often patched woolen garments, creating a collective mound of warmth against the pervasive cold. Layered over the shifts would be additional garments, a heavy, undyed woolen cloak, perhaps lined with fur if the family was fortunate enough to possess such a luxury. Hoods, essential for protecting the head and neck from drafts, would be pulled close, their thick fabric providing vital insulation. These layers were not decorative, they were functional, chosen for their ability to trap air and prevent heat loss. Clothes doubled as armor against the night. The heavy, dense weave of the wool, its natural lanolin providing some water resistance, created an impressive barrier against the cold. The layers trapped air, which, warmed by body heat, acted as an insulator. Each garment was a small, personal fortress, defending against the insidious creep of cold that permeated the hut. The comfort was minimal. The coarse wool was often scratchy, the layers cumbersome, and the restricted movement made truly deep sleep challenging. The clothes would absorb sweat and smoke, becoming damp and pungent, but to remove them was to invite lethal cold. The discomfort was a small price to pay for the invaluable warmth they provided. For the children, too, these sleeping garments were essential. Their small, vulnerable bodies, wrapped in multiple layers of rough wool and perhaps an old animal hide, were better shielded against the biting cold, increasing their chances of survival. You would meticulously ensure they were properly bundled, their heads covered, their tiny forms protected. Woolen shifts, cloaks and hoods served as blankets. Clothes doubled as armor against the night. Sleeping garments were a pervasive, fundamental ritual for medieval peasants in winter, transforming their raw ingenuity into the very means of defying a lethal environment. It was a slow drift through smoky cottages, frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with profound resourcefulness, charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead, and enduring countless cold nights under vast frozen skies, forever tethered to the life-giving warmth and resilience of their rough, insulating fabrics. The breath of animals. In the merciless grip of a medieval winter, when the cold permeated every fibre of existence and human warmth was a precious, dwindling resource, survival often depended on blurring the lines between human and beast. The breath of animals was a profound, life-saving gift. Cows, sheep, or goats sometimes shared the cottage. Their body heat, their very presence, contributing significantly to keeping frost at bay, transforming the humble dwelling into a living, breathing furnace, a testament to their shared struggle against the deadly chill. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the pervasive aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now infused with the stronger, musky smell of livestock. The sounds were no longer just the crackle of fire or the rustle of wool. They included the soft, rhythmic breathing of a cow, the gentle snuffling of goats, the occasional contented cluck of chickens, and the low, comforting hum of collective life. Breath misting in the darkness, a visible affirmation of warmth mingled with the shared exhalations of humans and their animal companions. As the evening meal was consumed and the fire carefully banked, the family would prepare for sleep. But for many peasant families, this meant more than just huddling together. Their most valuable animals, a single milk cow, a few sheep, providing wool and occasional meat, or a pair of goats whose milk sustained the children, were brought indoors. Often a byre was incorporated into the single-room cottage itself, separated only by a low wooden barrier or a few woven hurdles, ensuring maximum heat transfer. Listen to the slow, rhythmic breathing of the cow, its large body a massive, radiating furnace, its warm breath adding to the internal humidity of the cottage. Hear the gentle snuffling of the goats, their restless shifts on the straw, their occasional bleats quickly settling into a quiet contentedness. See the indistinct forms of the animals in the dim firelight, their bodies a warm, furry barrier against the cold that sought to penetrate the cottage walls. The warmth provided by the animals was immense, absolutely crucial for human survival. Their collective body heat, radiating outwards, could raise the ambient temperature of the cottage by several precious degrees. In the depths of winter, this difference could mean the distinction between a night of tolerable cold and a night of life-threatening hypothermia, especially for the most vulnerable members of the family. The animals' presence also offered a psychological comfort. In the terrifying darkness of a medieval winter night, the soft sounds of their breathing, their gentle movements were a constant reminder that life persisted, that they were not utterly alone against the overwhelming forces of the wild and the cold. It was a bond forged in mutual necessity, a testament to their shared struggle for survival. However, sharing the cottage with animals also came with its own set of challenges. Their bodily waste added to the pervasive dampness and smell of the cottage, requiring constant, diligent cleaning. Flies and other insects, even in colder weather, would be an annoyance, and the constant rustle and movement of sleeping animals could be a source of distraction, another impediment to truly restful sleep. Yet these were small prices to pay for the invaluable benefits they offered. Cows, sheep, or goats sometimes shared the cottage, their body heat helping keep frost at bay. The breath of animals was a pervasive, fundamental ritual for medieval peasants in winter, transforming their raw ingenuity and social bonds into the very means of defying a lethal environment. It was a slow drift through smoky cottages, frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with profound symbiosis, charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead and enduring countless cold nights under vast frozen skies, forever tethered to the life-giving warmth of each other and their collective animal companions, candles and darkness. In the medieval winter, when the sun offered only a fleeting pale light and the long nights stretched into a profound, terrifying gloom, illumination was a precious commodity. While the hearth fire provided a struggling warmth and a central glow, artificial light was a deliberate, often brief, luxury. Candles and darkness intertwined in the peasant's hut. Tallow candles burned briefly before being snuffed, carefully conserved. After that, only the dying firelight and the muffled breathing of a family huddled together filled the dark, shaping their rituals of rest and deepening their secret fears. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the pervasive aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now mingled with the faint, waxy smell of burning tallow. The sounds were no longer the gentle breathing of animals. They included the soft crackle of a dwindling fire, the occasional rustle of straw, and the profound, expectant silence that descended as a precious flame was extinguished. Firelight flickering against rough timber beams, casting dancing shadows, slowly gave way to near absolute darkness. Candles, typically made from tallow, rendered animal fat, or for the very fortunate beeswax, were a luxury. Tallow candles, while providing light, burned quickly, emitted a smoky, often unpleasant odor, and were expensive to produce or acquire. They were therefore conserved with extreme care, used only for the most essential tasks after dark, or for moments of solemn ritual. Listen to the soft, rhythmic flicker of the tallow candle's flame, its tiny movements creating a gentle, hypnotic dance of light and shadow on the rough stone or mud brick walls. Hear the low murmur of prayers, perhaps whispered before sleep, illuminated by its fragile glow. See the small, precious flame bravely pushing back the encompassing darkness, its light revealing the worn faces of your family gathered close. The candle might burn for a brief period after the evening meal, allowing for a few moments of mending tools, or for the telling of a short story, or for final prayers. But its precious light was not to be wasted. The moment would come when the head of the household, with a sigh of resignation, would carefully snuff out the flame. The tiny, precious spark would vanish, leaving behind only a thin wisp of smoke and an instant, profound increase in the darkness. After that, only firelight and breath filled the dark. The hut would be plunged into near absolute blackness, illuminated only by the dying glow of the banked embers in the hearth. The cold, which had been held at bay by the candle's light, would seem to deepen, pressing in from all sides. The psychological impact of this deliberate plunge into darkness was immense. The profound darkness of the long night was a realm of uncertainty and fear. Without the reassuring light of the candle, the sounds of the cottage, the rustle of straw, the breathing of animals, the distant creak of the roof were amplified, imbued with a subtle, unsettling menace. Imagined threats born from the depths of the unconscious mind would fill the void. For the children nestled close, the extinguishing of the candle marked a clear boundary, a transition to a more fearful time. You would pull them tighter, murmuring reassurances, but your own heart would be filled with the same profound fear, the same desperate hope that the fire's embers, however faint, would endure. Tallow candles burned briefly before being snuffed. After that, only firelight and breath filled the dark. Candles and darkness were a pervasive, fundamental ritual for medieval peasants in winter, transforming their raw ingenuity into the very means of defying a lethal environment. It was a slow drift through smoky cottages, frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with profound discipline, charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead and enduring countless cold nights under vast frozen skies, forever tethered to the fragile light of a dwindling fire and the pervasive gloom. The hardships, frost indoors, in the bone-chilling depths of a medieval winter, where the cold permeated every fibre of existence, and the world outside was a landscape of lethal ice and snow, the peasant's cottage was a fragile sanctuary. But for all its thick mud walls and thatched roof, it was never truly impervious to the relentless invasion of the elements. Despite every effort, frost still formed on walls and inside windows, a delicate, crystalline declaration of winter's triumph. The air often stung the lungs, a profound, chilling reality that turned their very homes into battlegrounds against the insidious cold. Imagine the air inside, thick with the pungent aroma of wood smoke, mingled with the earthy scent of damp mud brick, straw, and the subtle tang of human presence, now infused with a sharper, biting chill. The sounds were no longer just the soft crackle of a dwindling fire. They included the rhythmic creak of timber in the cold, the gentle breathing of a family huddled close, and the profound, almost eerie silence that winter itself could create. Snow drifting against shuttered doors was a visible barrier, but the true cold had already found its way inside. You would wake in the deep of night, roused by a shiver that permeated your rough woolen blankets, a cold that seemed to invade your very bones. Your eyes, accustomed to the profound darkness, would slowly discern a ghostly luminescence in the dim internal gloom. On the rough, uneven surfaces of the mud-daubed walls, particularly near the unglazed windows or where a cold draught was persistent, a delicate filigree of frost had formed. Listen to the subtle, almost inaudible crackle as a piece of ice, perhaps dislodged by a shift in temperature, fell to the packed earth floor. Hear the low murmur of other family members stirring restlessly, their own breath pluming white in the frigid air. See the thin, glittering layer of ice, a cold sparkle, outlining the rough texture of the mud brick, transforming the familiar walls into a winter tableau. On the inside of the crude wooden window, shutters or where a scrap of hide covered an opening, frost would gather thick and opaque, obscuring any view of the outside world, yet serving as a stark reminder of its lethal presence. You might reach out a finger, tracing a pattern on the icy surface, feeling its intense cold, a physical manifestation of the battle being lost. The air itself, though confined within the cottage, was often bitterly cold and carried a sharp, biting quality that made it sting the lungs with every inhale. The pervasive smoke, which should have offered warmth, now felt acrid and irritating in the extreme chill, contributing to a constant cough that racked the bodies of old and young alike. This was a profound psychological burden. The cottage, your sanctuary, was supposed to protect you, but the frost indoors was a chilling declaration that even your strongest defense was insufficient, that the outside world, in its lethal frigidity, had found a way to invade your most intimate space. It amplified the sense of vulnerability, deepening the fear of death by cold. For the children, nestled close, the frost might be a source of wonder, its glittering beauty a strange, ethereal presence. But for the adults, it was a grim omen, a constant, tangible reminder of the insidious cold that threatened their very lives. Despite every effort, frost still formed on walls and inside windows. The air often stung the lungs. Frost indoors was a pervasive, fundamental hardship for medieval peasants in winter, transforming their fragile homes into battlegrounds against the elements. It was a slow drift through smoky cottages' frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with profound endurance, charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead and enduring countless cold nights under vast frozen skies, forever battling the insidious triumphant march of winter into their very souls. Nighttime interruptions. In the profound darkness and bone-chilling cold of a medieval winter, where every ounce of warmth and every moment of rest was precious, sleep was rarely a deep, unbroken blessing. For the peasant family, the night was a ceaseless cycle of vigilance and immediate needs, ensuring their endurance against a lethal environment. Nighttime interruptions were a constant reality. The fire needed tending, animals stirred, children cried. Sleep was broken, shallow, never easy, transforming the very act of rest into a continuous battle against exhaustion and fear. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the pervasive aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now permeated by a profound chill. The sounds were no longer just the gentle breathing of a family settling to sleep. They included the soft crackle of a dwindling fire, the lowing of a restless cow, the whimpering of a cold child, and the hushed murmurs of an adult rising from bed. Snow drifting against shuttered doors was a visible barrier, but the true cold had found its way inside, demanding constant attention. You would be deep in a restless sleep, perhaps finally finding a brief reprieve from the day's relentless toil when it would begin. A sudden cold draft, a distant whimper, or the alarming absence of the fire's soft crackle. Your eyes would snap open, instantly alert, your body tense. The fire, so vital for warmth, was a constant concern. If the carefully banked embers died completely, the cottage would plunge into lethal cold, and the arduous task of striking a new spark in the darkness was immense. So, often, in the deepest hours of the night, one of the adults, or the designated fire tender, would have to rise. Listen to the soft scrape of a crude stick against cold ash, seeking the precious, persistent heart of the fire. Hear the gentle blowing, the careful placement of small, dry twigs, coaxing a tentative flame back to life. See the brief, orange glow, a tiny, defiant beacon against the oppressive darkness, momentarily pushing back the chill. Then there were the animals. Housed within the cottage for warmth, their presence was a blessing, but also a source of interruption. A cow might shift restlessly, its heavy breathing echoing in the quiet. A sheep might bleat softly, a goat might snuffle, requiring a gentle word or a reassuring touch. A sick animal groaning in its discomfort would demand immediate attention, its suffering an added burden to the night. And always the children. Their small, vulnerable bodies, sensitive to the cold, to hunger, or to frightening dreams, would cry out. A soft whimper would quickly escalate into a distressed sob, tearing at your heart, forcing you to rise. You would pull them closer, murmuring reassurances, offering a sip of cold water, or simply the warmth of your own body, until their cries subsided and they drifted back into a fitful slumber. These nighttime interruptions were a constant drain on precious energy, transforming rest into a fragmented, shallow affair. Sleep was never easy, never deep, always on the edge of awareness, constantly battling against the elements, the needs of the family, and the lingering anxieties of survival. The fire needed tending, animals stirred, children cried. Sleep was broken, shallow, never easy. Nighttime interruptions were a pervasive, fundamental hardship for medieval peasants in winter, transforming their fragile rest into a continuous battle against overwhelming fatigue and the relentless demands of a lethal environment. It was a slow drift through smoky cottages' frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with profound endurance, charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead and enduring countless cold nights under vast frozen skies, forever tethered to the incessant life-sustaining demands of the dark. Splitting sleep. In the profound darkness and biting cold of a medieval winter, when artificial light was a rare luxury and the demands of survival were absolute, humanity's ancient biological rhythms asserted their dominance. For most peasants, sleep was not a monolithic, unbroken 8-hour stretch. Instead, it was fundamentally segmented. Most peasants practiced segmented sleep, an early slumber, waking at midnight, then drifting into a second, lighter sleep again till dawn. This was not a choice for comfort, but a natural adaptation, a profound strategy for navigating the long, arduous nights, deeply intertwined with their daily struggles and their unwavering resilience. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the pervasive aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now permeated by a profound chill. The sounds were no longer the simple chatter of a village. They included the soft crackle of a dwindling fire, the gentle breathing of a family in its first sleep, and the profound, almost eerie silence that defined the deep middle of the night. Snow drifting against shuttered doors offered a muted barrier, but the cold still seeped in. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the evening meal was consumed, the family would settle onto their straw beds. Exhaustion, a constant companion after a day of unremitting toil, would quickly claim them. This was the first sleep, a deep, heavy plunge into oblivion, a raw, primal rest designed to recover from the physical demands of daylight. Bodies, aching from field work, from hauling wood, from tending animals, would sink into this initial profound slumber, usually lasting for a few hours after sunset. Listen to the low, rhythmic breathing of your family members, their soft snores, the gentle rustle of straw as bodies settled. Hear the subtle sounds of the animals in their byre, their breathing a comforting backdrop. See the indistinct forms of the huddle in the dim, firelit gloom, a temporary island of rest in a vast, cold world. But then, in the heart of the night, usually around midnight, a natural awakening would occur. It was not a sudden, jarring event, but a slow, gradual return to consciousness. The deep cold, having permeated all layers, would seep into the bones, rousing you from your heavy slumber. Or perhaps an internal clock, tuned to ancient rhythms, would simply signal the end of the first sleep. This waking period, often lasting an hour or more, was woven into the fabric of peasant life. It was a time for tending the fire, ensuring its embers did not die entirely, adding small pieces of precious fuel to keep a fragile glow. It might be a time for night prayers, for quiet contemplation, for processing the anxieties of the day, for sharing hushed conversations with a wakeful spouse. It might also be a time for essential chores, checking on a sick child, tending to a restless animal, or a brief, shivering trip outside for a call of nature. The sounds of this waking period were hushed, the soft rustle of straw, the quiet murmurs of prayer, the faint scrape of stick on ash, the careful placement of kindling on the embers. The other members of the family, though mostly asleep, would occasionally stir, their breathing shallow, their presence a quiet comfort in the shared vigil. Finally, after an hour or two, as the coldest hours of the night began to wane, a deeper weariness would return. The fire, if rekindled, would have settled into a low glow. The essential tasks would be done. You would pull your blankets tighter, burrow deeper into the straw, and drift into the second sleep. This was often a lighter, less profound slumber than the first, but equally vital, lasting until the cock's crow announced the approach of dawn. Most peasants practiced segmented sleep, An early slumber, waking at midnight, then sleeping again till dawn. Splitting sleep was a pervasive, fundamental hardship for medieval peasants in winter, transforming their raw ingenuity into the very means of defying a lethal environment. It was a slow drift through smoky cottages, frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with profound adaptation, charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead and enduring countless cold nights under vast, frozen skies, forever tethered to the fractured rhythms of their enduring, life-sustaining rest. Winter, illness. In the medieval winter, when brutal cold permeated every fibre of existence, and life was a constant battle against the elements, sickness was not merely a threat, it was an ever-present, terrifying spectre. The damp chill, the crowded conditions, the poor nutrition, and the pervasive smoke conspired to create a lethal environment. Winter illness was a relentless scourge. Cold nights brought coughs, fevers, and frostbite, and the bed, far from being a guarantee of safety, often became a place of profound suffering, transforming the very act of rest into a desperate struggle against death. Winter illness. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the pervasive aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now mingled with the sour smell of sickness and fever. The sounds were no longer just the crackle of fire or the gentle breathing of a sleeping family. They included the insistent, racking coughs, the low moans of fever, the quiet whimpers of pain, and the anxious murmurs of worried family members. Snow drifting against shuttered doors offered a muted barrier, but the cold and illness had already found their way inside. You would be roused from a shallow, fitful sleep, not by a sudden noise, but by the alarming heat radiating from a child beside you, their small body burning with an internal fire. Or perhaps your husband would stir, groaning softly, his chest rattling with a deep, persistent cough. The transition from apparent health to devastating illness could be terrifyingly swift, particularly for the most vulnerable. Listen to the incessant hacking coughs echoing through the hut, their sound raw and insistent, making breath a painful struggle. Hear the low moans of feverish bodies tossing restlessly on the straw bed, their skin slick with sweat, yet shivering uncontrollably. See the flushed faces, the dull, unfocused eyes, the small, frail bodies fighting a desperate, silent battle against an invisible enemy. The cold nights brought a host of specific ailments. Persistent coughs and chest fevers could quickly escalate into pneumonia, stealing breath with terrifying speed. Frostbite, insidious and painful, could claim fingers, toes, or ears, turning flesh black and leading to agonizing loss. Scurvy, brought by the lack of fresh food and vitamin C, weakened the body, making it susceptible to other infections. The cramped, smoky conditions within the cottage were breeding grounds for illness. Poor ventilation meant stale air, thick with pathogens and lung-irritating smoke. The constant proximity of bodies, human and animal, ensured swift contagion. A single cough could spread disease from bed to bed, often claiming whole households in its relentless grip. There was little effective medicine. The village healers' herbs and whispered spells, while offering hope and comfort, were often futile against such profound illnesses. The priest's prayers, though fervent, seemed to go unanswered as death continued its grim harvest. The bed was no guarantee of safety. Instead, it became a crucible of suffering, a place where life ebbed away slowly, painfully. The long, dark hours of the night seemed to stretch interminably when someone was ill. The sounds of their suffering filled the hut, amplifying your own helplessness, your profound grief. Cold nights brought coughs, fevers, and frostbite. The bed was no guarantee of safety. Winter illness was a pervasive, fundamental hardship for medieval peasants, transforming their fragile rest into a continuous battle against overwhelming pain and the relentless assault of disease. It was a slow drift through smoky cottages, frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with profound endurance, charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead and enduring countless cold nights under vast frozen skies, forever haunted by the silent, relentless killer that stalked their most vulnerable. The fear of death. In the medieval winter, when the world outside was a brutal, frozen landscape and the cold permeated every fibre of existence, life was a precarious daily gamble. For the peasant, death was not a distant abstraction, but an intimate, ever-present visitor, particularly during the harsh, unforgiving months of deep cold and scarcity. The fear of death was pervasive. Every winter carried the fear of not waking for cold, was a silent killer creeping into homes as surely as hunger, a profound, chilling reality that overshadowed every moment of rest and every prayer. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the pervasive aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now infused with a profound, almost suffocating stillness. The sounds were no longer the gentle breathing of a sleeping family. They included the soft crackle of a dwindling fire, the low moan of a restless elder, the quiet whimpers of a cold child, and the profound, almost eerie silence that sometimes fell over a household. Snow drifting against shuttered doors offered a muted barrier, but the fear of death was already inside. You would lie on your straw bed, huddled close to your family, wrapped in every available blanket, yet unable to fully surrender to sleep. The cold was a relentless, insidious enemy. It seeped up from the damp ground, found gaps in your furs, settled deep into your bones, threatening to steal the very warmth from your body, to extinguish the fragile spark of life. Listen to your own ragged breathing, the shallow breaths of your partner beside you, the quiet whimpers of a child struggling against the chill. Hear the pervasive silence that settled over the hut in the deepest hours, amplifying every subtle sound, every creak of timber, every rustle of straw. See the indistinct forms of your family huddled together, a fragile mound of life against the overwhelming cold. The fear of not waking was a profound, unspoken anxiety that haunted every peasant. Cold was a silent killer, creeping into homes as surely as hunger. It could induce hypothermia slowly, imperceptibly, lulling a body into a final, fatal sleep from which there was no return. The risk was particularly acute for the very young, the very old, and those already weakened by illness or chronic hunger. This fear was amplified by the lack of understanding about the true causes of death. Was it the cold itself? Was it a malevolent spirit attracted by the extreme weather? Was it divine punishment for some unknown sin? The mystery surrounding death only deepened the terror, making it harder to fight, harder to comprehend. You would wake in the dead of night, a sudden jolt of terror, and instinctively reach out to touch your child, your partner, to confirm their warmth, their breathing, their continued presence. The profound relief that washed over you when you found them warm and alive was quickly replaced by the lingering dread that it might not be so fortunate tomorrow. The ritual of splitting sleep, of waking in the middle of the night to tend the fire, was partly a practical defense against this fear. It ensured that someone was always vigilant, always fighting the cold, always making sure the spark of life endured. Every winter carried the fear of not waking. Cold was a silent killer, creeping into homes as surely as hunger. The fear of death was a pervasive, fundamental hardship for medieval peasants, transforming their fragile rest into a continuous battle against an invisible enemy. It was a slow drift through smoky cottages, frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with profound endurance, charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead, and enduring countless cold nights under vast frozen skies, forever tethered to the relentless shadow of mortality, a silent, pervasive dread that defined their daily struggle for survival. Custom and belief, charms against the cold. In the medieval winter, when the biting cold was a lethal, ever-present enemy, medieval peasants, lacking scientific understanding or effective physical remedies, often turned to spiritual and magical defenses. Faith in God was paramount, but so too was a deep, practical belief in the power of ancient folk traditions. Charms against the cold were a fundamental ritual. Herbs, prayers, and specific talismans were placed near beds, tucked into clothing, or whispered over the sleeping, believed to ward off illness and frost, creating a fragile magical shield against the insidious chill that threatened to steal life. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the pervasive aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now mingled with the pungent smell of dried herbs and beeswax. The sounds were no longer the simple chatter of a village. They included hushed murmurs of prayer, the soft rustle of protective pouches, and the profound, almost eerie silence that accompanied rituals of protection. Snow drifting against shuttered doors was a visible barrier, but the true cold and its unseen dangers required spiritual defense. The belief in malevolent spirits, mischievous fairies, and the lingering influence of witches was deeply ingrained. These forces were thought to be particularly active during the dark, cold nights of winter, exacerbating illness, causing frostbite, and bringing misfortune. To leave oneself or one's family unprotected was to invite profound catastrophe. Listen to the low, muttered words of a mother carefully tucking a small fabric pouch beneath her child's straw pillow, whispering an ancient blessing. Hear the anxious pronouncements of the village healer advising on specific herbs to be hung above the doorframe. See the crude, handmade crosses fashioned from wood or straw, fixed above every window, every doorway, their presence a silent, unwavering prayer. Herbs were a primary component of these charms. Strong-smelling plants, often those known for their medicinal properties, were also believed to possess apotropaic, evil-averting powers. Sprigs of juniper, rosemary, garlic, and rue might be dried and bundled, then placed near the bed, hung above the hearth, or tucked into the straw mattress. Their pungent aromas were thought to ward off cold-induced illness, to purify the air, and to repel malevolent entities. Specific prayers, often a blend of Christian invocations and older folk spells, would be whispered over the charms, imbuing them with protective power. These were not formal liturgical prayers, but personal, heartfelt pleas for warmth, health, and safety against the winter's bite. A small piece of consecrated bread, a relic of communion, or a blessed candle stub might be hidden in a cloth pouch for added spiritual protection. Other talismans were also used. A smooth river stone, perhaps with a natural hole, might be placed under the bed, believed to prevent nightmares and hag riding, a feeling of being pressed down by a spirit. A piece of iron, a metal with powerful protective qualities, might be placed near the threshold or sewn into the lining of a blanket. These were physical anchors for their spiritual fears. The efficacy of these charms was rarely questioned. In a world where cause and effect were often mysterious, where a sudden illness or a patch of severe frostbite could seem to strike without logical reason, such tangible protections offered a vital sense of control. They were a way for ordinary people to feel they had some agency against the overwhelming forces that governed their lives. Herbs, prayers, and charms were placed near beds, believed to ward off illness and frost. Charms against the cold were a pervasive, fundamental ritual for medieval peasants in winter, transforming their raw ingenuity into the very means of defying a lethal environment. It was a slow drift through smoky cottages, frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with profound spiritual belief, charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead and enduring countless cold nights under vast, frozen skies, forever tethered to the enduring, magical, and fragile shield of their customs and beliefs. Prayers before sleep. In the medieval winter, when the pervasive cold gnawed at the body and the long, dark nights amplified every fear, the peasant's life was a ceaseless cycle of toil and vulnerability. Yet for all their physical hardships, their spiritual world was intensely vibrant, a fundamental source of strength and solace. Prayers before sleep were a universal, deeply ingrained ritual. A final murmur to God for protection, whispered under blankets which became part of their nightly custom, a profound act of faith that sought divine mercy and quieted the anxieties of a world teeming with seen and unseen dangers. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the pervasive aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now permeated by a profound stillness. The sounds were no longer the simple chatter of a village. They included the low murmur of whispered prayers, the soft rustle of straw beneath worn blankets, and the gentle breathing of a family preparing for sleep. Firelight flickering against rough timber beams cast dancing shadows, illuminating a world utterly dependent on its fragile glow. As the evening meal was consumed and the fire carefully banked, the family would gather on their straw bed. Before surrendering to the shallow, fitful sleep of the cold night, the head of the household, father, mother, or eldest elder, would lead the family in a solemn, often whispered prayer. This was a moment of profound spiritual reckoning, a final plea for divine favor and protection. Listen to the low, murmured words of the blessing. Bless us, O Lord, and keep us safe through this night. Guard our home, our family, and our animals from all evil, from cold, from hunger, and from unseen spirit. Grant us peaceful sleep, and bring us safely to the light of morning. Amen. Or a simpler, more personal prayer shaped by the immediate anxieties of the day, a plea for an end to a persistent cough, for protection from wolves, for mercy on a struggling neighbor. These prayers, often the Pater Noster, the Ave Maria, or other familiar invocations, were imbued with a terrifying urgency. The night was believed to be the domain of malevolent forces, the devil, demons, mischievous spirits and witches, whose power waxed strongest in the profound gloom. To go to sleep without prayer was to leave oneself utterly vulnerable, to risk spiritual attack or profound misfortune. The prayers were whispered under blankets, often with heads bowed, eyes closed, and hands clasped tightly, perhaps clutching a small, crude crucifix hidden beneath the covering. This intimate, personal act of devotion was a final, desperate shield, a direct appeal to God and the saints for protection against both tangible and intangible dangers. The fear of unconfessed sin was immense. If one died in their sleep with sin on their soul, they faced eternal damnation. Thus, these nightly prayers were also a form of spiritual cleansing, a plea for forgiveness for the day's transgressions, a way to ensure their immortal soul was at peace with God before facing the unknown of sleep and death. For the children, nestled close, these nightly prayers were implicitly absorbed. They learned early the gravity of sin, the power of God, and the terrifying consequences of eternal damnation, shaping their moral compass from a young age. They understood that their very survival depended not just on hard work, but on maintaining the correct spiritual relationship with God. A final murmur to God for protection, whispered under blankets, became part of nightly ritual. Prayers before sleep were a weird, pervasive, an often frightening aspect of daily life for medieval peasants in winter. It was an unspoken code, a constant, pervasive presence that shaped their spiritual lives, deepened their secret fears, and reminded them that their very existence was bound by faith, by custom, and by the terrifying power of God to both protect and condemn, transforming a moment of rest into a vital act of spiritual devotion. Winter stories. In the profound darkness and bone-chilling cold of a medieval winter, when the short days were consumed by relentless toil and the long nights stretched endlessly, there was little room for idle entertainment. Yet, as families huddled around their struggling hearth fires, a vital, ancient ritual unfolded: winter stories. Families passed the time telling tales, myths, born in the shadow of the fire, a powerful communal way to keep the mind from dwelling on the deadly cold, to transmit knowledge, and to reinforce cultural bonds against the pervasive gloom and fear. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the comforting aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now permeated by a palpable stillness. The sounds were no longer the simple chatter of a village. They included the low, hypnotic voice of the storyteller, the soft gasps of children, and the rhythmic crackle of a dwindling fire. Firelight flickering against rough timber beams, casting dancing shadows, illuminated a world utterly dependent on its fragile glow and the power of narrative. After the evening meal was consumed and the fire carefully banked, the family would gather closer to the hearth, its flames now carefully managed to a persistent glow. This was the moment for narrative, for the oral tradition that preserved their history, their beliefs, and their knowledge. The storyteller, often an elder or a respected member of the household, would begin, their voice a low, rhythmic murmur that wove through the smoky air. Listen to the low, resonant voice of the storyteller, describing ancient myths, tales of saints, of local heroes, of mischievous fairies, of terrifying giants, or of cunning animals. Hear the soft gasps of children, their eyes wide and fixed on the dancing shadows, their small imaginations populating the gloom with the creatures and characters of the tales. See the elders, their faces etched with the hard-won wisdom of countless winters, listening intently, their own memories intertwining with the narrative. These winter stories served multiple vital functions. Firstly, they were a powerful way to keep the mind from dwelling on the deadly cold. For a few precious hours, the captivating narrative could transport listeners away from the physical discomfort, the gnawing hunger, and the pervasive fear of the night, offering a psychological escape. Secondly, they were a crucial means of cultural transmission. The stories taught the young about the history of their village, the customs of their ancestors, the moral lessons of their faith, and the practical knowledge needed for survival. Tales of brave hunters provided lessons in strategy. Stories of encounters with malevolent spirits conveyed warnings about the dangers of the wilderness and the unseen world. Thirdly, they reinforced communal bonds. The shared experience of listening, of participating in the narrative, strengthened the ties that held the family and the village together. It was a ritual of collective memory, ensuring that the wisdom and heritage of the past were passed down to future generations, however fragile their existence. The flickering firelight, casting its dancing shadows on the mud brick walls, became an integral part of the storytelling. A hand held just so could cast the shadow of a leaping animal or a monstrous figure. The movement of the flames themselves could mimic a battle, a chase, a gathering of spirits, adding a layer of visual drama to the oral traditions. Families passed the time telling tales, a way to keep the mind from dwelling on the deadly cold. Winter stories were a weird, pervasive, and often comforting aspect of daily life for medieval peasants in winter. It was an unspoken code, a constant, pervasive presence that shaped their nightly rituals, deepening their cultural memory and reminding them that their very existence was bound by tradition, by faith, and by the profound power of narrative to defy the darkness, weaving a fragile shield against the relentless, terrifying cold. Dreams of warmth. In the bone-chilling depths of a medieval winter, where the cold permeated every fibre of existence and hunger gnawed at empty bellies, sleep was rarely a deep, peaceful oblivion. It was a fragile, restless commodity, constantly interrupted by discomfort, by distant dangers, or by the gnawing anxieties of survival. Yet, even when exhaustion finally claimed them, the mind, in its peculiar freedom, sometimes offered a fleeting, cruel solace. Dreams of warmth. Dreams often mirrored hunger and longing, vivid visions of feasts, summer fields, or fires that never died, transforming the oppressive reality into a poignant, often tormenting, nocturnal escape. You would stir from a nightmare, your heart pounding, your body slick with a cold sweat, a silent scream caught in your throat. The hut would be in near absolute darkness, the embers long since faded to nothing. The familiar shapes of your sleeping family, huddled close, would be indistinct, and for a terrifying moment, the oppressive gloom would seem to hold the spectral forms of your dream. The dream itself would be vivid, tantalizing, utterly convincing. You would see tables laden with steaming food, golden and soft, not the coarse, hard rye of your daily reality, but fine wheat, light and airy. Bowls overflowing with rich, thick stews, full of tender meat and succulent vegetables, not the thin, watery broth you had consumed hours ago. You would smell the aromas of a feast, roasted game, sweet apples, the pungent tang of rich cheese, but above all, you would feel warmth. The glorious, all-encompassing warmth of a summer sun on your skin, a gentle breeze rustling through green, fertile fields. The radiating heat of a roaring, inexhaustible fire, its flames dancing brightly, banishing all cold, filling a vast, welcoming hall. The blissful sensation of heat, so desperately craved, would permeate your dream world, immediate and irresistible, making your shivering body relax in profound, fleeting comfort. The dreams were often a cruel deception. In your slumber, you would eat, devour, bask in the phantom bounty and warmth, feeling a fleeting, profound satisfaction. The gnawing ache in your belly would temporarily recede, replaced by a sense of fullness, of comfort, of the deep, primal contentment of a truly sated, truly warm body. For a brief, precious moment, the crushing reality of hunger and cold would be banished. But then, inevitably, as the dream began to fray at the edges, the truth would begin to assert itself. The food would melt away, the warmth dissolve, the blissful sensation vanish. You would stir, waking slowly, the phantom taste still lingering on your tongue, the ghost of warmth still in your body. And then, with a profound, sickening lurch, the reality would crash down. The hut would be dark and cold, the straw beneath you hard and uncomfortable. Your actual belly would ache, hollow and empty, the gnawing hunger returning with a vengeance, amplified by the cruel trick of the dream. Your body would shiver, once again battling the pervasive chill. The tantalizing images, so vivid just moments before, would now feel like a profound torment, a reminder of what you lacked, what you craved, what was so desperately out of reach. Dreams often mirrored hunger and longing, feasts, summer fields, fires that never died. Dreams of warmth were a weird, pervasive, and often frightening aspect of daily life for medieval peasants in winter. It was an unspoken code, a constant, pervasive presence that shaped their spiritual lives, deepening their secret fears and reminding them that their very existence was bound by merciless physical realities. It was a slow drift through smoky cottages, frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with profound suffering charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead and enduring countless cold nights under vast frozen skies, forever haunted by the poignant, often tormenting memory of lost comfort. The dawn watch, in the profound darkness and bone-chilling cold of a medieval winter, when the longest night finally began its slow, grudging retreat, a unique ritual of endurance unfolded, the dawn watch. This was the liminal hour, a time of profound transition between the terrors of darkness and the promise of light. First light was both relief and dread for the peasant, relief for surviving another brutal night, but dread for the long cold day ahead, a constant pervasive anxiety that transformed the very arrival of morning into a moment of complex fear and unwavering resolution. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the pervasive aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now permeated by a biting chill that seemed sharper than before. The sounds were no longer the simple chatter of a village. They included the soft crackle of a dying fire, the low moan of a restless elder, the quiet whimpers of a cold child, and the profound, almost eerie silence that sometimes fell over a household. Snow drifting against shuttered doors offered a muted barrier, but the true cold and its dangers demanded vigilance. You would be roused from a shallow, fitful sleep, perhaps by the cold itself, or by an internal clock, a primal awareness that the turning of the night was at hand. The hut would be in near absolute darkness, the embers of the hearth having dwindled to their lowest, most precarious point. Your breath, when exhaled, would plume in dense, white clouds, a stark, visible affirmation of the cold that permeated everything. Listen to the low, rhythmic breathing of your family members, their soft snores, the gentle rustle of straw as bodies shifted. Hear the pervasive silence that settled over the hut in these deepest hours, amplifying every subtle sound, every creak of timber, every rustle of straw. See the indistinct forms of your family, huddled together, a fragile mound of life against the overwhelming cold. The first act of the dawn watch was always the fire. The designated fire tender, or the head of the household, would carefully stir the ashes, seeking the precious, persistent heart of the fire. With painstaking care, they would add tiny, dry twigs, blowing gently, coaxing a tentative flame back to life. This was a vital act, for the promise of the new day depended on the survival of this fragile spark. As the fire slowly gained strength, its flickering glow pushing back the shadows, your gaze would drift towards the small, unglazed openings that served as windows, or towards the cracks in the shuttered door. There, against the absolute blackness of the night, a subtle shift would occur. A faint, bruised grey, barely discernible, would begin to paint the eastern sky, a mere whisper of approaching light. First light was both relief and dread, relief for surviving, dread for the long, cold day ahead. The relief was immense, profound. Another night of cold, of fear, of uncertainty had been endured. The dangers of predators, of bandits, of malevolent spirits which thrived in the darkness were beginning to recede. You had, against immense odds, survived. But this relief was quickly tempered by dread. The dawn brought not ease, but a new set of challenges. The cold, though slowly receding, would still bite. The hunger, momentarily stilled by the morning's meagre meal, would soon return. The relentless, back-breaking labor in the frozen fields awaited. The cycle of hardship, of struggle, of silent endurance was about to begin anew. First light was both relief and dread, relief for surviving, dread for the long, cold day ahead. The dawn watch was a weird, pervasive, and often frightening aspect of daily life for medieval peasants in winter. It was an unspoken code, a constant pervasive presence that shaped their spiritual lives, deepened their secret fears, and reminded them that their very existence was bound by faith, by custom, and by the relentless demands of survival, transforming the very arrival of morning into a moment of complex fear and unwavering resolution. The memory of survival, lessons passed down. In the brutal, unforgiving grip of a medieval winter, where freezing to death was a constant, terrifying threat, survival was rarely a matter of luck alone. It was the product of generations of accumulated wisdom, of hard-won knowledge, of ingenious adaptations, all meticulously preserved and transmitted. Lessons passed down were a fundamental unspoken code. Elders taught children small tricks of warmth, where to place blankets, how to bank fires, how to sleep in pairs, weaving a vital tapestry of survival strategies into the very fabric of their lives, ensuring continuity against the relentless cold. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the pervasive aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now permeated by the quiet hum of shared knowledge. The sounds were no longer the simple chatter of a village. They included the low, measured tones of an elder's voice, the soft rustle of straw beneath worn blankets, and the gentle breathing of children listening intently. Firelight flickering against rough timber beams cast dancing shadows, illuminating the profound act of cultural transmission. The elders, those who had weathered countless harsh winters, were the living libraries of their community. Their bodies, though frail, held the wisdom of generations, etched into their gnarled hands and knowing eyes. They had faced famines, blizzards, and the insidious creep of cold, and they had learned the intricate, subtle ways to defy death by freezing. Their knowledge was not written in scrolls, but in the practice of their lives, passed down through direct demonstration and patient, whispered instruction. Listen to the low, rhythmic voice of an elder patiently demonstrating how to arrange a thin blanket, how to tuck it just so, to create a tight, insulating pocket against the cold. Hear the gentle guidance correcting a child's clumsy attempt to pile straw, showing them how to maximize its insulating power. See the children, their faces rapt, their eyes wide, absorbing every detail, understanding implicitly the profound importance of these lessons. Small tricks of warmth were vital. The lesson of where to place blankets was crucial, not just haphazardly, but layered to trap air, tucked in tightly around the neck and feet, sealing off drafts. The importance of covering the head, of wrapping hands and feet, however crudely, to protect vulnerable extremities from frostbite. These seemingly simple techniques, often born of painful past experiences, were meticulously taught. How to bank fires was another critical skill. Not simply covering embers with ash, but understanding the precise amount of ash, the correct placement of small, dry twigs, the gentle art of blowing to keep a spark alive for hours. This knowledge was passed down through direct instruction, through countless hours of observation by the hearth, ensuring the life-giving flame would endure. And crucially, how to sleep in pairs or in a tight huddle. Elders would teach children the value of shared body heat, demonstrating how to press close, to intertwine limbs, to become a single, collective furnace against the deadly chill. They would explain that individual warmth was insufficient. Only the combined heat of many bodies effectively managed could truly defy the lethal cold. Elders taught children small tricks of warmth, where to place blankets, how to bank fires, how to sleep in pairs. Lessons passed down were a weird, pervasive, and often comforting aspect of daily life for medieval peasants in winter. It was an unspoken code, a constant, pervasive presence that shaped their survival strategies, deepening their cultural memory and reminding them that their very existence was bound by tradition, by shared knowledge, and by the profound ingenuity of those who had endured countless cold nights under vast frozen skies, forever building their resilience against freezing dead, the endless winter cycle. For the medieval peasant, life was an unrelenting dance with the seasons, and winter, particularly, was a brutal existential trial. But their survival was not a random occurrence. It was the product of deep-seated knowledge, of skills honed over generations, of rituals meticulously repeated. The endless winter cycle was a profound, ingrained rhythm. Every year the ritual repeated: gather wood, mend roots, patch clothing. Survival rehearsed again and again, a ceaseless preparation for the next onslaught of cold, a testament to unwavering endurance. Imagine the air, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the pervasive aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence. The sounds were no longer just the low murmur of conversations. They included the rhythmic clang of axes chopping wood, the soft scrape of reeds against a roof, the rustle of sewing needles through coarse wool, and the muffled breathing of a family preparing for the inescapable cold. Snow drifting against shuttered doors was a visible barrier, but the true preparation began long before its first flakes. From the first hint of autumn, the rhythm of life subtly shifted. The frantic pace of harvest would give way to an equally intense, though different, kind of labor. Every waking hour would be dedicated to preparing for the coming cold, to stockpiling the necessary resources, to fortifying their fragile homes. Listen to the rhythmic thud of an axe chopping wood in the distant forest, its sound echoing through the crisp autumn air. Hear the soft scrape of reeds being tied to the roof, the gentle thump of mud being patted onto a wall, sealing cracks. See the careful, deliberate movements of hands patching worn clothing, each stitch a small, desperate act of defense against the biting chill. Gather wood was a ceaseless imperative. As soon as the harvest was in, attention turned to the forests. Every fallen branch, every piece of scavenged timber, every lump of peat or dried dung was precious. It was painstakingly collected, hauled back to the village and stacked carefully by the cottage door, a tangible bulwark against the cold. The very act of gathering was a constant rehearsal, a physical preparation for the brutal energy demands of winter. Mend roofs was another vital task. The thatched roof, thick and insulating, was perpetually vulnerable to the elements. Before the heavy snows and freezing rains, every weak spot had to be identified, every hole patched with fresh reeds or straw, every timber reinforced. This meticulous work was a desperate effort to create an impenetrable shield against the bitter winds and the deadly cold, ensuring the cottage's integrity. Patch clothing was equally critical. The rough woolen garments, worn thin by ceaseless use, were their primary defense against hypothermia. Every tear, every worn spot, every unraveling seam had to be meticulously repaired with bone needles and sinew thread. Layers were added, thicker cloaks were prepared, hoods reinforced, transforming their clothes into a vital armor against the night's chill. This was survival rehearsed again and again. The knowledge, the skills, the rituals, all were passed down through generations, implicitly absorbed by the young, meticulously practiced by the adults. It was a profound cultural memory, etched into the very fabric of their daily routines, ensuring that the wisdom of the past was never forgotten. The memory of survival, the bond of cold nights. In the brutal, unforgiving grip of a medieval winter, when the cold permeated every fibre of existence and the world outside was a landscape of lethal ice and snow, hardship was not merely a personal burden. It was a shared, communal experience that forged unbreakable connections. The bond of cold nights was a profound, enduring reality. Hardship bound families together. Winter nights were remembered as both misery and intimacy, a deep, silent understanding that transcended daily struggles, creating a resilient tapestry of human connection against overwhelming odds. Imagine the air inside, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the pervasive aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now permeated by the profound stillness of the deepest night. The sounds were no longer just the crackle of fire. They included the soft, rhythmic breathing of many bodies, the gentle rustle of worn blankets, and the low, comforting hum of collective life. Snow drifting against shuttered doors offered a muted barrier, but the true warmth came from within. As the fire dwindled to its lowest glow, casting long, dancing shadows, the entire family would arrange themselves for sleep. Their bed, a communal pallet on the packed earth floor, thickly layered with straw, became a dense mound of intertwined bodies. Parents, children, sometimes even elderly relatives, would pack together, limbs tangled, bodies pressed close. This physical proximity was not merely for warmth. It was a profound act of mutual reliance, a shared defense against the insidious cold. Listen to the gentle, rhythmic breathing of your family members, their soft snores, the quiet whimpers of a child nestled close. Hear the subtle movements of the worn blankets, the rustle of straw, as bodies instinctively sought a closer, warmer position. See the indistinct forms of the huddle in the dim light, a protective mound of human life, unified by necessity, against the immense, cold emptiness of the cottage. The cold was relentless, but the shared body heat of the huddle created a precious microclimate, a resilient pocket of warmth. You would feel the warmth emanating from your partner's back, the small, insistent heat from a child tucked beneath your arm. This constant physical contact, born of necessity, forged a profound emotional bond, a deep sense of intimacy and mutual dependence. Winter nights were remembered as both misery and intimacy. The misery was undeniable, the gnawing hunger, the constant cold, the shallow, interrupted sleep, the fear of illness and death. These hardships were a shared burden, endured collectively, forging a deep empathy among family members. But within that misery, paradoxically, emerged a profound intimacy. The whispered stories by the fire, the shared prayers before sleep, the quiet reassurances given to a frightened child. These were moments of intense, personal connection, amplified by the external threat. The shared suffering, the collective struggle, created a bond that transcended the daily frustrations and minor squabbles. In the face of a lethal environment, the family was an unbreakable unit, their survival inextricably linked. This profound sense of interdependence, forged in the crucible of cold, became a lasting memory, a cornerstone of their identity. For the children, growing up in this environment, the cold nights taught them the profound value of family, of community, of shared survival. They learned that their well-being was utterly reliant on the strength and presence of others, a fundamental lesson etched into their earliest memories. Hardship-bound families together. Winter nights were remembered as both misery and intimacy. The bond of cold nights was a weird, pervasive, and profoundly comforting aspect of daily life for medieval peasants. It was an unspoken code, a constant, pervasive presence that shaped their spiritual lives, deepened their cultural memory, and reminded them that their very existence was bound by shared hardship, by profound human connection, and by the unwavering resilience of those who had endured countless cold nights under vast, frozen skies, forever cherishing the fragile warmth of shared survival. From cottage to memory. In the medieval winter, the peasant's cottage was more than a mere shelter. It was the crucible of survival, a tiny, fragile island of life against the vast, lethal expanse of cold and darkness. Every aspect of its construction, its rituals, and its intimate daily life was shaped by the relentless demands of the season. From cottage to memory, the way peasants endured winter shaped not just their immediate survival, but the very rhythms of medieval life itself, creating an enduring legacy of resilience, ingenuity, and profound adaptation that resonated through generations, and unwritten history etched into the very fabric of their culture. Imagine the air thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the pervasive aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now permeated by the profound quiet of history. The sounds are no longer the simple chatter of a living family. They include the low murmur of ancestral stories, the distant toll of church bells echoing through centuries, and the quiet rustle of memory itself. Snow drifting against shuttered doors becomes a poignant symbol of a struggle long past, yet still remembered. The cottage itself, with its thick mud walls, its insulating thatched roof, and its central hearth, was a testament to ingenious, practical architecture. It was built from the earth, designed to resist the elements, and provided the fundamental thermal barrier that allowed human life to persist in a climate that was often unforgiving. Its very form, its construction techniques, were passed down through countless generations, a physical manifestation of accumulated knowledge. Listen to the low, rhythmic crackle of a modern fire, and imagine the thousands of hearths that burned before it, each one a small defiance against the cold. Hear the echoes of ancient lullabies, sung to soothe children in the dark, their words carrying the wisdom of enduring hardship. See the enduring images of peasant life, the huddle of a family, the banked fire, the mend of a worn blanket, not just as historical facts, but as living memories constantly informing our understanding of resilience. The rituals of winter, sleep so meticulously detailed in previous segments. The shared bed, the banking of fires, the wearing of multiple layers, the presence of animals indoors, the segmented sleep patterns, the prayers, the stories. These were not random customs. They were carefully honed strategies, developed and refined over centuries of trial and error, ensuring that humanity could defy the deadly grip of winter. These daily struggles and their solutions shaped the broader rhythms of medieval life. The long periods of winter dormancy enforced by the cold influenced the patterns of work and rest throughout the entire year. The intense communal bonding forged during cold nights reinforced social cohesion, creating a society that valued interdependence and mutual support above all else. The peasants' intimate connection to the land, their profound understanding of natural cycles, their reliance on local resources. These were lessons learned and reinforced by the relentless demands of winter. Their ability to extract warmth, food, and shelter from a harsh environment became a defining characteristic of their culture. The quiet endurance. The brutal medieval winter, with its lethal cold, its endless darkness, and its myriad dangers, had always been humanity's most formidable adversary. But for the peasant, huddled in their mud-daubed cottage, the story was not one of defeat, but of profound, unwavering persistence. Though life was short and harsh, winter nights were endured with patience, ritual, and the fragile warmth of shared survival, a silent, ceaseless testament to their quiet endurance, echoing through centuries, defining the very essence of medieval life. Imagine the air, thick with the earthy scent of mud brick, the comforting aroma of wood smoke, and the subtle tang of human presence, now permeated by the profound stillness of memory. The sounds are no longer the harsh cry of the wind. They include the low murmur of ancestral voices, the distant toll of church bells echoing through centuries, and the quiet rustle of history itself. Snow drifting against shuttered doors becomes a poignant symbol of a struggle long past, yet still profoundly felt. From the relentless cold outside to the intimate battles within the cottage, every aspect of the peasant's winter life was a challenge. The thick mud walls, the thatched roof, the central hearth, the straw beds, the heavy woolen clothes, the shared warmth of family. And animals! These were the physical tools of their survival, meticulously crafted and maintained. Listen to the low, rhythmic crackle of a modern fire, and imagine the thousands of hearths that burned before it, each one a small defiance against the cold. Hear the echoes of ancient lullabies, sung to soothe children in the dark, their words carrying the wisdom of enduring hardship. See the enduring images of peasant life, the huddle of a family, the banked fire, the mend of a worn blanket, not just as historical facts, but as living memories, constantly informing our understanding of resilience. The rituals of winter sleep, so meticulously detailed, the segmented sleep, the prayers before bed, the winter stories, the vigilant dawn watch. These were not random customs. They were deeply ingrained strategies, developed and refined over centuries of trial and error, ensuring that humanity could defy the deadly grip of winter, transforming moments of intense fear into acts of profound, shared endurance. This quiet endurance was not born of ignorance or apathy. It was born of necessity, of an unwavering will to live. It was a strength forged in the crucible of hardship, a deep-seated resilience that allowed them to face famine, sickness, and death with a stoicism that bewilders modern minds. They were the anonymous heroes of their age, their silent struggles the foundation upon which all subsequent civilization would be built. The bond of cold nights, forged in misery and intimacy, created an unbreakable fabric of family and community. The lessons passed down, the constant rehearsal of survival strategies, ensured that each generation was equipped with the ancestral wisdom needed to face the inevitable return of winter. Their memory, preserved not in grand texts, but in the very rhythm of human resilience, became a timeless testament to the power of the human spirit. Though life was short and harsh, winter nights were endured with patience, ritual, and the fragile warmth of shared survival. The quiet endurance of medieval peasants in winter was a profound, inspiring testament to human resilience, a living legacy that defines the very essence of medieval life. It is a slow drift through smoky cottages, frost-rimmed windows, weaving together ancient instincts with unwavering determination, charting how people built their very existence against freezing dead, and enduring countless cold nights under vast, frozen skies, forever embedded in the enduring memory of their profound, humble survival, a constant reminder of the strength found in quiet endurance.